session today with Rebekah and Bella. I'm just going to read very briefly, not everything, because we all have the program. So here is Rebekah Charleston. Rebekah is the Executive Director of Valiant Hearts, a consultant with the National Criminal Justice Training Center, mother, honors graduate student, and advocate for victims of human trafficking. She's passionate about this issue because at the age of 17, she ran away and became a victim of human trafficking for more than 10 years. She had multiple traffickers and was not able to escape until the federal authorities finally became involved. As a survivor, Rebekah has wisdom to impart and a story that will help you understand the issue, as well as shedding light on what happens here in America. Rebekah is the recipient of several awards, including the Survivor Leader Emmy in 2016, and has been featured in multiple media opportunities, including Deadline Crimes. Rebekah's story is one of hope and restoration. Thank you, Rebekah, for being here. Now, this is Bella Robinson. She's coming all the way from the cold. From Rhode Island. Bella Robinson is a sex workers' rights activist who has founded the Rhode Island chapter of Call Off Your Own Fired Ethics, CoyoteRI, in 2010, and has served as the executive director since. As the director of Coyote, Bella looks to build and strengthen support networks for sex workers in Rhode Island, and she works in close collaboration with activists nationwide. Bella is a strong proponent of centering the voices of sex workers in policies that affect our population. In the late 90s, she was incarcerated for 5 years at Lower Correctional Institute in Florida, and during incarceration experienced sexual assault at the hands of the state. So there's two very different experiences with the state here. It is with this perspective that she advocates for sex worker rights as a solution to policies that seek carceral redress for sex trafficking crimes. Robinson is also on the advisory committee of the Sex Worker Outreach Project Behind Bars, an organization that supports incarcerated sex workers from a variety of backgrounds, including African Americans, immigrants, and the Latino population in the U.S. With Swap Behind Bars, Robinson works with activists from other organizations to educate public defenders' offices county by county so they better understand how to best defend people with prostitution-related charges. For about 2 years, the organization she directs has been working with the Center for the Study of Slavery and Justice of Brown University to collect data on the different forms of violence experienced by sex workers based in Rhode Island. Please welcome and the panel is organized. We are not using PowerPoint. We are doing, as a moderator, I prepare a set of questions sent to them beforehand, and they are just going to have a chance to answer those questions, and then have a chance to ask each other questions, and then we are going to move on at the end, and we are going to welcome audience questions, and we will try to devote at least 20 minutes, 15 minutes for questions, so you are welcome to write it down whenever it comes to your mind while the panel is going on, and write your questions and ask them. All right? So thank you very much for being here once again. So the first question that we had was, this is a basic. We started with the basics. What is your definition of sex work? Bella is going to give her input, and then Rebekah, please.
The definition of a sex worker to us is anyone that earns their living off erotic labor. So you have legal sex workers and illegal sex workers. You have dominatrix. You have cam models, porn performers, sex phone operators, online escorts, and street-based workers. Sex or trafficking alone is forcing someone into a labor. When we're talking about sex trafficking, involves anyone under 18 is automatically a domestic sex trafficking victim, even if there's not a third party involved. and forcing someone by force, coercion, or fraud to engage in prostitution. We see why a lot of the narrative makes this really a black and white thing. We see most of it as a real gray area. And I'll let you answer.
Sure, I feel like just the term sex work is just an oxymoron in itself. I feel like sex is something beautiful that should be between two consenting adults. And I think the simple fact that you have to be paid in order to have sex with someone means that there's no free choice there, that especially something that's as influential as money, when that comes into the picture, it exerts power. And I feel like sex work is I feel like it's gender-based violence, and that it's commercial sexual exploitation, whether it's by choice, the myth of the woman that is out there that really has options and yet chooses to do that. I feel like that's the rare exception and not the norm. And so I feel that I don't want to restrict what people do. I think we all have autonomy and agency, as we talked about out there. But when it comes to the research and what the research indicates about people that work in prostitution, identifies them as the most vulnerable people in our society. And I don't know, I ask audiences this all the time, what does it say about us as a society that we know how victimized they are, and yet we tell them, well, that's okay, you're good enough to just do that. That somehow, that just killed me about what it says about us as people that are on the outside.
Would you like to comment and then counter?
Well, I can say that I know a lot of people, there's a whole lot of different levels of empowerment in the sex industry. I started off, my first arrest was 2 weeks after I turned 18. I'm now 54. I still earn my living as a sex worker. I also understand if we had a magic wand and we could make it go away, then no one seems to care if these women have access to pay their rent, feed their children, because I rarely hear anyone from trafficking talk about poverty or lack of affordable housing, lack of jobs that pay a wage, higher education. It's all about pimps and nests. And we see criminalization as normalizing violence towards women because the trafficking narrative really is about steeping women. The boys are left out. It casts people as predators. It casts sex workers as the bad people. The funding doesn't allow us a seat at the table. So there's all these dynamics, and sex workers could be the best tool we have to fight trafficking. So while I'll totally admit a lot of people don't have many other options, removing the few options they have to financial security and safety probably would lead to a lot worse abuse.
Do you want to comment?
Yeah, sure. I couldn't actually agree more with parts of what you're saying. I think that we've done a horrible job as a society, and we've done a huge disservice to people that are in the sex industry. I feel like they need options, they need services, and I think you're right. We need to address poverty, we need to address childhood sexual abuse, we need to address all the factors that made them vulnerable and made them fall prey to that. And address that. That's what actually we do at Valiant Hearts, is we walk alongside women, whether they're trafficked or dancers or whatever it is in the sex industry, and we walk alongside them and help them and give them those options to address those barriers that they have to leaving.
Okay. Good. The second question was, what is your definition of sex trafficking? Oh, we did sex work. We did sex trafficking too, okay. So I just would like to comment on the answer that both of you have given very briefly. First of all, prostitution it's an ongoing issue. It's even older than capitalism, right? So there's that. And also, I've been involved with several sex workers organizations in Brazil, and there is a big discussion among the sex workers there who are organized, who say that why, for example, the work of the domestic labor does not cause as much commotion as sex work, because. And what they say is, and I'm just repeating, okay? is that one of the reasons is because of the grassroots of the feminist movement happened with middle class women at the beginning, to say the least. Middle class women take advantage, especially in countries like mine, of a system who allows cheap house labor. So they say, well, why there is not a commotion to domestic labor, making very little money, and why sex workers and prostitution cause so much worries and noise, and why not domestic servants do not provoke the same reactions. So this parallel between domestic labor and sex work. And also arranged marriages, right? How do we tolerate arranged marriage, or have been tolerated arranged marriage, coming to the definition of sex between two persons that love each other, the very definition of marriage as an institution, how it has been used historically, at least, to put families together, wealthy families together, and continue wealth. So it's very complicated, and I just want us to keep that in mind.
I'm really glad you pointed that out, because it's so important, right? When we look at the whole pie, sex trafficking is like 20% of the pie, right? I mean, and that's just a back to Charleston stat right there, like, but with the other huge 80%, the majority of it is labor trafficking, and that looks completely different. Polaris Project put out a report, 25 different typologies of human trafficking that's been identified in America. So I mean, it's ubiquitous, it's in every single city, and the labor trafficking and sex trafficking are completely different, right? In terms of what the victims look like and what the traffickers look like. So labor trafficking is by and large perpetrated by women. And when we look at sex trafficking, a small portion of that is pimp-controlled sex trafficking, which is my story. But when we compare familial trafficking, survival sex, right, it looks vastly different. And I'm glad you said that, because I think it's really easy right now that sex trafficking is kind of the hot button issue, when there's if that's all we're looking for, if we're just looking for cases like mine of pimp-controlled sex trafficking, then we're missing hundreds of thousands of them.
Would you like to comment?
I want to talk about the morals thing. Now, we all have different beliefs. We're all entitled to our beliefs. And I'm going to use an abortion as an example. I'm totally okay with people who are pro-life until they try to create laws to criminalize other women for not following their beliefs. And when we have an issue like that, no matter how much data, we're going to be fighting about this for 1,000 years. And it's the same thing with sex work. We're now living in a hookup culture where the majority of young people are having casual sex with people they barely know. And we've taught women it's okay to have sex and not be ashamed. But when women have free sex and are lied to or exploited or used, no one seems to care. No one seems to really care about the thousands of kids that are sexually abused by priests and predatory church. A majority of the youth engaged in, I like the term survival sex, have been exploited by police officers. So when they go to the trafficking ward who parades the police around, they're also abused by some of these case managers in the foster home. And I'm not in any way saying anyone or all of these people are either good or bad. But I sat and thought at some of these panels, I was a sex trafficking victim at 18, well, not a victim. I was arrested 2 weeks after I was 18. I was a child raised in foster care and married off to a 41-year-old man at age 17. And when youth rather engage in survival sex than stay where they are, we're missing what's happening from the beginning. Policing adults, consensual adults, the number one client of sex workers are middle-aged white men. They're politicians, they're professors, they run our schools, they run our governments. But when we do end the demand, we go to poor neighborhoods of color and lock up Latino guys that are 22 that were looking for a $60 massage because that's all they can afford. And I will totally admit there was all kinds of different levels. I spent 10 years on the streets in Florida as a street-based worker, addicted to crack cocaine. Sure, that people take advantage of me, of course. But at some point, I need to own up that I was making really bad choices, and I need to be accountable for, once I got clean and started making good choices, my life got a lot stabler. So throwing me in prison for 5 years, where I was sexually assaulted by correctional officers for 5 years, doesn't give me much hope and faith in the future. When the money aligns who the gatekeepers to the services are, because everyone says there's these services. But I can tell you, if a sex worker call any trafficking organization and say, I put my pimp out, or they took him to jail, now I need my rent paid. No one's gonna pay your rent or feed your kids or pay your bills. They wanna put you in a shelter and abandon you to live in poverty. So I always wonder, how is it the victim escape poverty after they get? Well, they get a job at an NGO. I invite everyone to go to godstore.org and see how much money is spent in salaries and offices and how little money is spent on services. It's kind of like throwing pennies at people. And then they're the gatekeepers to services, and you can't get services unless you're willing to exit. Raids and rescues are very traumatic for sex workers. We actually rate these experiences at ratethatrescue.org. We find shaming people is abusive. It's a form of, it's like conversion therapy to gay people. So I'm mindful that everyone has different experiences. Our experiences were very different. And there's a lot of gray area of people that can control. But when you can't come forward and report who's trying to abuse you because you've been criminalized, it gives the predators all the power.
So what you're trying to say is that criminalization actually increases trafficking.
Of course it
and
does.
facilitates the work of trafficking.
Of course it does. And we know that was Foster. We have the data.
Okay. And what's your take on that, Rebekah?
Gosh, that's a lot.
You can talk a little bit about your experience with the police and what happened to you, and what was your experience with the law enforcement different from Valiant?
Yeah, I've been getting arrested since like maybe 15 was the first time, 16 if not. And I had not very favorable experiences with law enforcement. And I know we're going to get to FOSTA SESTA in a second, but I think that standing from the outside when you evaluate nonprofits and NGOs and what they do, just want to highlight something that you mentioned about salaries. Well, as a director now that does run a nonprofit, when you look at nonprofits and you evaluate them, you have to realize like salaries are actually programs, right? Me spending 80% of my time on a program is actually me executing that program. So just to throw that out there. But I think probably agree in some areas more than I disagree. I do feel like prostitution should be decriminalized, and we're starting to see that shift in the state of Texas, but that has to go hand in hand with criminalizing the buying. We have to go after the demand that creates the supply, right, for sex trafficking. I do not think that women should be arrested for prostitution, period, point blank, at all.
It's interesting you talk about, and the demands of the Nordic model. It started in Sweden. And every place it's been implemented, it's increased exploitation and violence.
Explain a little bit about what this is.
And the demand means that the women are all victims, and we're going to go after the clients, which are 99% are men, because even male sex workers, their clients are men. Okay? So let's pretend again we have a magic wand and we can make all the clients go away. They just disappear. No one again cares. The women can't pay the rent and feed the kids, which they're vulnerable, not even to sex trafficking, but all kinds of abuses. They become homeless. They're displaced. So in Ireland, they passed the Nordic model, and let me make sure that I'm telling you the right stuff. Within a year, violence towards sex workers increased by 54%, and violent crimes nationwide went up 77%. So somehow, casting them all, my clients are nice guys, and actually I think...
So wait, I just want to be clear. So in Ireland, they decriminalized the selling and they criminalized the buying?
Yes, it started in the Nordic model because it was both legal, both of it was legal, okay? And we've seen the same thing in Canada. But I want to, kind of lost my train of thought. Nordic model, violence towards women.
You were talking about she supports the criminalization.
Right. Oh, about the clients. Okay. You'll read, like, if you hear a story about someone posing as a cable man breaking into houses, they don't tell you he's a cable man. They say someone posing as a cable man. There's a lot of predators that pretend to be clients, and they say the clients did. No, clients don't rape, rob, and exploit sex workers. Actually, my clients are the only ones I think that don't exploit me, because I'm exploited by the state. I'm exploited by trafficking NGOs that have a multi-million, $500 million in funding to create awareness, not to pay your rent or do anything. I believe if this money was reinvested in LGBT-friendly group homes and subsidized housing for poor women, people would exit the sex industry by choice, not because they've been arrested and forced to. I think we also create a lot of stigma against sex workers, which promotes violence against them, because in many states, if you're raped and left for dead in an alley by a stranger, they're allowed to bring up the fact that you have a prostitution conviction, as if you can't be credible, it's okay to abuse you. Just last fall, we had a Texas Border Patrol officer murdered 4 sex workers within 2 days. And these crimes go we also have a database of thousands of law enforcement officers that have sexually assaulted children. And we're not just talking about teens. Sometimes they're little kids. They get probation, 3 years in jail. They're not decertified. Actually, more sex crimes by law enforcement that have happened over the last 5 or 10 years, 1/3 of those cases involve a minor. But again, no one wants to focus on this and the reason the regular labor trafficking, which 80% of human trafficking is garment factories, fishing boats, domestic workers, farms, the reason it's not popular is because it's not scandalous. We can't make great books and movies, and people can't sit around and kind of fetishize over what we call trauma porn. And I'm not in any way saying all trafficking people are bad and we're all right. But actually, funding says if you support decriminalization, you're in violation of your TIPS funding from the federal government, that we can't get any harm reduction money because they claim it promotes prostitution, but I can get harm reduction funding to do outreach to drug users, and no one's suggesting I'm promoting drug use. So, and I get when she talked about the salaries, I've been running Coyote since 2010. I work 4 hours a week as a sex worker, which enables me to work 60 hours a week for free, running CoyoteRI. When we get to the point about what our organization does, I think you're going to be amazed at the stuff we've got done on a $9,000 budget last year, compared to what, $388,000? Program services.
Would you like to come?
Sure, yeah. So you've already highlighted several incidences, it sounds like, where you were violated working in sex work. And I'm sure you know, just like most of us here in the room, that sex work is actually, if we're gonna call it a profession, is one of the most dangerous. Serial killers, who do they go after? Homeless people and prostituted people, because you're right. People judge them as they are less than, and they look the other way, that somehow, because of something that they did out of necessity in terms of being a prostitute or working in the sex industry, that then puts a scarlet letter on their chest that I'm still trying to overcome. I have a federal felony that I'm still trying to get off my record, especially being arrested for prostitution. I was interning with Rise Court, and I'll never forget, one of the ladies called in one day, and a very famous nonprofit had told her she could not complete her community service there because she was a prostitute. That's how society views us. And so I think, and I know you mentioned your drug use. Like, I definitely use drugs off and on throughout my life while being exploited, and even before that. But due to the workplace violence and drug use, how could you possibly say that sex work is safe? And when you say that you've never had it, that your clients are the only ones that don't exploit you, like, I don't know how many times I've been in fist fights with grown men, and I've run out of hotel rooms with my clothes in my hand while I'm getting dressed in the stairwell, and I can hear the guy still screaming because I just maced him in his eyeballs as he tried to violently rape me and rob me. How many times I've found guns in hotel rooms? How many women I know that have been murdered by customers or by their pimps?
My customers are someone posing as a customer. Because none of my violence happened by a customer. All the violence happened from the system, from the police, from the correctional officers, from society being discriminated. You can lose housing, you can lose custody of your children. When an abuser says, hey, You want me to leave? I'm gonna call the cops and show them your back page ad and you're going to jail and they're coming to get your kids and you're being evicted. And when you're arrested for prostitution, you get displaced, you lose your car, you lose your kids, you lose your home, you have to start all over again. So I'm not saying it's safe, we know it's not safe. Prostitution is the most dangerous job in America, and I'm 40 more times likely to be murdered than any one of you. But part of that responsibility is society, who has allowed this to become acceptable. I asked a lot of youth that I teach at Brown University, how old were you when you knew what a prostitute was, and where'd you learn this? Well, most of us know by 7 or 8 years old, and we don't learn it at home or in church or in school. And they say cop shows, prostitutes are always portrayed as half naked looking in car windows, even though 85% of us work indoors nowadays. And the one boy, there's a black boy, says, we're driving down the road late at night, there's a woman on the street corner. I said, Mama, how come you're not gonna offer her a ride? And his mother said, because she's a bad woman. And he says he wasn't even old enough to understand what sex was, but he already knew she was a bad woman. So when we teach society that bad women get what they deserve, what we say? It starts spilling over to non-sex workers.
May I comment on that? There was a study published a few years ago by a professor at Purdue University where she collected data and was able to prove that, going back to your point about women that are victims of massive murder, how do you call that again?
Serial killer.
Serial killer. And she, one of the results of her research was that a sex worker or a prostitute, depending on which term you choose, and there's a whole issue with the terminology that we can discuss later, she or he is 5 times more likely to become a target for a serial killer.
Homeless women, drug users.
And but why is that? And then she says, well, social invisibility, because a mother of a college girl crying on TV asking for justice is going to cause more commotion, and therefore is going to spark more controversy, and therefore is going to force the authorities to investigate it further. Now, when a sex worker is killed, there is not the same outcry. You're not going to see, first of all, who is the mother of that sex worker? Is she going to go on TV? Does she have any contact with her family at all? So she says that the social invisibility is in fact one of the factors that supports the actions of serial killers. So I just wanted to contribute to the discussion to ask ourselves, what is our role in supporting the stigma? When do we have the chance to come across a person, a woman or a man who share their stories as former or current sex workers? It's mostly in a place of shame and regret, but we don't get too often the chance to hear someone who is not speaking from that place that would give us the chance to, first of all, have a different perspective, and second, to be able to humanize that person who is doing sex work and see her or him as a mother, a daughter, someone's sister, brother, and so I think that in what refers to the danger of the profession, I think the social stigma that surrounds sex work, reinforced by media and literature.
Law enforcement actually refers us to NHI. That means no human involved. That is what they cast prostitutes, drug users, and homeless people. When you think about safety, you would agree, whether you like sex work or not, you can agree that people are safer if there's 2 or 3 of you together, right? But if I work with another sex worker, we can all be charged with felony, pandering, and promoting. But if I work alone, it's only a misdemeanor. So all the laws are set up to make sex workers unsafer in hopes we will exit. So we're not going anywhere. We've been around since the beginning of time. We're strong women, we're resilient, we support our youth, we're community organizers. Does anyone in any profession want to see their own colleagues abused or exploited? Of course not. And we have been separated by this narrative that we are the bad people and the victims are the good people, and the victims are worthy than everyone else because, they're just more worthy. We become invisible, and we're cast as almost the trafficker themselves. And I'm not saying that some sex workers are traffickers or exploiters, or that some women can't exploit people. Of course they can. And this is the idea of predators, that we think they're gonna look like a crazy homeless guy. Predators look like just anyone in here. They can be anyone in it. And it doesn't have to be prostitution that people are sexually exploiting kids. This is happening in group homes. This is happening with police departments. And again, I'm not saying all police departments are bad, but when police departments and churches cover up that abuse, and they don't want to admit it, and they cover it up, don't they kind of become culprit, like the bad clients that are culprit? So making the clients go away, I don't believe we can police 1% of the sex industry in the United States on a good day. And we've been doing this for 20 years, and it's an utterly failed approach. We can't, sex workers can identify trafficking victims. Asking the public to snitch on sex workers to get them arrested so we can try to get them to understand the victims is abusive. It's causing 100 women to go to jail to save one person. And again, there's a big gray area in between. When any person should be able to come forward and report crime without being with arrest. I'll talk a little bit about the data we've collected. In Rhode Island, we surveyed 63 Rhode Island sex workers, and 77% of them said they wouldn't report violence to fear of being arrested, threatened with arrest, outing their coworkers, or they don't think the police would do anything. What is wrong with this that these women aren't worthy to report violence? But like you said, you're the college student and there's helicopters in the air. We're normaling violence towards women, period. And we're leaving a lot of exploited people out of these conversations.
And even when we define prostitution or a woman who works in the sex industry as someone who is selling her body, would you like to comment on that a little bit, the idea of prostitutes sell their bodies and then use them? Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, first I just want to give you a public apology on behalf of all law enforcement that has harmed you and treated you so bad. And I know it's not obviously my responsibility.
Of course not.
But honestly, it sounds like you've had horrible experiences. I have as well in my past, but I've also seen the tide change in the country. And I'm really excited, like some of my law enforcement partners are in the room today, and like I can guarantee that none of you guys would ever say NHI. Like you would never say, oh, it was a prostitute, no human was involved. And like I'm proud to say, after going on Tarrant County Sheriff outreach stings, like none of the women have been arrested. I've been able to be in the room, and they see the women as who they are, as hurt and abused and recovering from abuse, and that they need help. They don't need a criminal record, and none of the women have been arrested since I've been there. And which is just amazing. I sat last week with Senator Cornyn, with the Dallas Police Chief Renee Hall, with the Dallas DA John. Help me out. Cruza, thank you. But got to sit with them and actually hear both of those people that are by and large in control of the city of Dallas say that we never want to arrest another woman for prostitution. And so it's slow moving. I wish that it would happen overnight. I wish that it would reach rural areas in all the states across the country. I wish it would be worldwide, that we would no longer see someone that's either choosing to be a prostitute or being prostituted as a criminal, because they're not. I mean, Melissa Farley, there's been so many people that have done amazing studies on people people that work in the sex industry, whether trafficked or not. And I mean, at the end of the day, you know, the overwhelming majority, there's different stats, but 90+% of them have been abused as children. I mean, there's factors that led them into that line of work. Like, I don't think, is there anybody in this room that would stand up and say, yeah, I want my daughter to be a prostitute?
But
I mean,
here's the question, if your daughter chose to be a prostitute, would you want her to be safe?
I would love her, and I would give her every opportunity
Because
and walk
obviously
alongside her.
you can't control it, right?
That's what we do as a ministry for people that aren't even our daughters, people that I don't even know. I'm not going to tell you what you're doing is wrong. I'm not.
Let me
finish. I'm not going to tell you what you're doing is wrong, because that's not my place. I'm not the judge. But I would love to walk alongside you, and when you are ready to leave, I would open up a variety of services, help with rent. I mean, those things that you called out earlier that NGOs won't do. I mean, like all my partners in the room, like that's exactly what we do, is we help them with those things, because we're asking them, I mean, we're not even asking, but literally leaving exploitation, just like, well,
So
just like you mentioned,
leave.
like I actually, no, not to receive services. No,
So
no.
you're saying any sex worker can call your organization and you'll pay their rent?
When I chose to leave and get out, I had to choose poverty. And that was really hard. I've been arrested 10 times, had a federal felony. I mean, been abused, obviously, manipulated, coerced for more than a decade. And I had to choose poverty. I had to choose to move into my mom and dad's house and sleep on their couch, get on Medicaid and food stamps. I was 4 months pregnant, no idea what I'm gonna do with my life, high school dropout. I mean, no idea if I could even sit through one class. And so I know all too well how hard it is to get out in the variety of services, and you need a community of support to wrap around you. I mean, things like, I mean, all the women we work with, like, you can get a job with no teeth. You know what I mean? Like, I mean, there's real medical issues that need to be addressed in order to empower them to do something that they're proud of.
And what would happen with a woman who does not want to leave the sex industry?
Or getting a job that pays $10 an hour that doesn't even, your wages doesn't even cost the part of the housing. So this idea that people can just go get a job and they'll be okay, when we don't talk about poverty, and even your poverty, you know, I recognize my privilege as a white woman, okay? Even though I'm a sex worker, but a lot of people don't have cushy parents to go move in, and they're not pregnant or don't have minor children, so they can't access Medicaid. So this idea that people have become the gatekeepers to who's worthy of subsidized housing and safety, and it's based on accident, when I know tons of sex workers that only do sex work part-time to supplement their income. Okay, they have regular jobs, they're in college. A lot of them have PhDs, a lot of them are sleeping in their cars with master's degrees because they cannot get jobs. So why isn't it, 30 years ago you could walk into a government building and you fill out an application. There's a housing crisis in every city in America. But these are things that we don't hear about that much. And as a compromise, I like to use the term people involved in the sex trade. Anytime I talk about youth, I label that as survival sex. I don't believe that youth should have to engage in survival sex to meet their needs. But when we've created all these barriers, when kids rather live in the street and engage in survival sex, something's already broken. So going after clients that can't tell if someone's 17 or 22, pointing out to Melissa Farley, who has actually had complaints levied against her. She interviewed all the brothel workers in Nevada, and no one would say they were forced. She came up to the conclusion that we all have false consciousness, and 90% of them want to leave their jobs. Well, I challenge you to go to Walmart and ask Walmart workers how many of them want to leave their job. Probably most of them. When we fought in California for sex workers to have right to victims' compensation when they're raped or violently abused, Melissa Farley, who believes all sex work is rape, says, well, they're already being raped, so what's the problem? So the lack of empathy, the lack of trying to steal someone's agency. I get when you're a minor, you don't have agency, but as an adult woman, to cast all clients as bad. Of course, sex workers, like I said, there's different levels of experience, there's normalized violence, but we're doing nothing as a society or through our laws to make anything safer. And we have failed. We're never going to get rid of it. We're never going away. There's always going to be predators. There's always going to be sex workers. So this idea that we can start arresting men charge them $900 to go to John's school for 10 years, so the police and the NGO can share that money, and none of that money trickles down to sex workers or people that are being really abused, except for the few cases that they do rescue, which then we can parade around and highlight that horrific part of abuse is if it's the average experience. It's not the average experience. Sex workers have a rare variety of different experiences, and over the last 35 years, my experience has changed dramatically by starting to not smoke crack, not date losers, start to screen clients, not party at night, pick daytime clients where I know who they are or where they work. In places like Chicago, most of the clients are law enforcement. So this idea that a client is a bad man and he's a certain way, and there's men that are disabled, there's men that can't access, there's men that don't want to be in relationships. Not all of us believe sex has to be a relationship. So these are all different lines. My goal is to reduce trafficking, reduce violence, and empower people to have agency, so there's not this uneven power dynamic. To meet people with respect. I liked the panel before where we talked a lot about the youth. They still run away. They go back to the harm. Sometimes it's trust issues. Sometimes it's triggering. Sometimes they just felt freer. And it's also hard to teach a 17-year-old that's been making a lot of money, smoking weed, not going to school, to make them go back to a home and treat them like they're 5. And I think better approaches is offering housing vouchers, free education, with no barriers. There can't be, when you put a barrier in place, well, you gotta do this. The barrier should be, stay in school, meet with the case manager once a month, and you're gonna get these services till you're 21. When kids age out of the foster system at 18, they're put out with nothing. Like I said, minimum wage jobs don't pay your rent. How are you going to go to school even with the Pell Grant? So rather than fix some of these problems at the bottom that cause, think about homeless women. I don't care if you're 15 or 80 years old. I think if you're homeless, you're susceptible to violence. You can be raped, beaten all the time. You ever see how society treats homeless people? And I grew up thinking they were all alcoholics and kind of deserved it. Any one of us are a few paychecks away from being homeless. So we actually, anytime I present, I stand up for homeless people, poor people, people of color, sex workers, undocumented, trans women, LGBT, queer folks. These are all marginalized populations. All these issues interconnect. And when we try to separate the pimp from the victim, the good from the bad, all the focus, because if we solve trafficking, all these people would be out of a job. The trafficking NGO is the biggest growth in industry since the 2009 recession, other than low-paying jobs. And none of the money is really going to the majority of the people affected. So the kind of organizing we do, as the people affected are the lead organizers. We can speak for ourselves. We don't need other people to speak to us. We just think that kind of levels the playing field. And when you don't allow sex workers to have a seat at the table, you're doing a huge injustice. So I think things like this, where there's both sides of the story, people have different experiences, can start to bring real solutions.
Before we move on to the next question, do you want to make any comment, or I can just jump into the FOSTA?
So many. Just go ahead and jump in.
All right. So, because this question is important. The question was, what is the FOSTA-SESTA law, and what are some of the impacts of this legislation? So, Rebekah, you will answer first now, and then Bella.
So, FOSTA-SESTA, I think we probably all are pretty familiar with the impact. So, but probably not from even a survivor perspective, and I'm sure definitely not from their perspective. But I think FOSTA-SESTA is a great thing. I think I was excited to see it pass.
Just a moment. FOSTA stands for Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act, and SESTA stands for Stop Enabling Sex Traffickers Act. Just hold.
Right, so like Backpage, and which was the most sensationalized case that was shut down due to FOSTA-SESTA being passed. And while I fully support it still, I'm also see the fallout of what happened, because now basically we took away a revenue stream from marginalized people and didn't give them anything. We just took something away. And I think we did a huge disservice to victims across the country or to people that are in the sex industry across the country, that we should have said, yeah, we're going to shut this down. We don't want people being able to advertise prostitution. I mean, right, it is illegal. And sex trafficking is an aggravated form by the federal definition. But the fact that we didn't say, okay, yeah, we're going to take this down because these people are actually traffickers by posting this on the website, they're promoting prostitution, but we didn't offer them any services. We didn't have social services in place in every community, and so it's marginalized those people even further. And now I can say that, being on this other side and being able to see that, when the survivor community that I've networked with across the country, you know, we didn't see that coming. We didn't think of that. We did not realize the unjustness of that. And so I think Sweden was hugely successful with the Nordic model because they had so many social services in place in the country. And I think that we don't have enough social services, and I think that's something that we agree on, is that there's not enough organizations that we work with and partner with. We do that and look at, you know, what is your actual impact? What are you doing? Are you just sounding an alarm, which is important because we need awareness and education, but what are you actually doing? What's the work that you're actually doing? Because there is a difference between the shiny pretty movement of look at me, this is what I'm out here sounding the siren, and versus actually doing the work and actually helping other people. There is a division, which is sad to see, and I think we do need more social services in place across the country.
Thank you.
So FOSTA and SESTA remove Section 230 of the Community Decency Law. So when you post something on Facebook, you can't hold Facebook liable for third-party content. Well, FOSTA doesn't even define what a prostitution ad is. It claims that prostitution causes trafficking, which is like saying marriage causes domestic violence. Backpage was actually arrested and seized 2 weeks before FOSTA, which is probably going to get them off the hook. Federal judges had already released them when Harris ran for her Senate seat, had them arrested and locked up, but the judge says, they didn't do anything illegal. Backpage versus DART. The judge says, I know there's illegal adult sex workers like dominatrix and strippers, and you can't just claim every ad's a prostitute. Escort ads have been in the yellow pages for 50 years. But before the internet, there were more pimps and predators because you needed a third-party market facilitator, or you were on the street or a massage parlor, or you gave an agency half your money. So the internet allowed the majority of sex workers to become independent if they wanted to. Well, we wanted to see what the effects of FOSTA was, so we ran a survey within the first 2 weeks of it passing, collecting data on 262 sex workers across America, which is a small sample, but it's double the sample Polaris Project uses for things. And what we find is there was a 28% drop in screening practices. There was a 60% of sex workers took on less safe clients to make their needs met. And 65% of sex workers had people try to exploit them and get freebies that hadn't done it before. I actually had a New York pimp text me saying, come to New York and you can make $5,000 a week modeling for Victoria's Secret. Well, I ain't that dumb, but I'm sure some people are. Now, other statistics we have is just recently, San Francisco police says that street human sex trafficking has gone up 170% since FOSTA was implemented. But there's a politician who claimed that it reduced within a month. It got rid of 90% of sex trafficking, and we already saw within 3 months all the online ads have already rebounded. They're starting to leave the United States. Now, amazingly, everyone is all against Backpage making how much money, but no one cares how much Walmart makes when they exploit people, and you have to go on healthcare and subsidize government things because they're not paying you a living wage. Backpage actually got an award from the FBI, I think around 2012, for their cooperation and reporting ads that they thought were underage or someone that might be in trouble. When they cut their credit card services because Sheriff Dart threatened credit card companies with arrest, and the judge says, you can't do that. They said, girls, you know what? All the ads are free until we figure it out. Now, since FOSTA, a lot of sex workers are now advertising on Eros.com, who just 2 weeks ago doubled the rate of the ads. Instead of it costing you $5 or $10, the ads costing you several $100s a month to advertise. We also asked in the survey, what bills they couldn't pay within a week. Within 1 week of Boston, the least empowered sex workers were thrown out of hotels with their children, placed out to the streets. People start showing up with guns and knives and robbing and raping them because they know they cannot call the police. Does everyone remember the Craigslist killer in 2009? He killed the girl in Boston. He went to Rhode Island to try to rob an escort, and she was decriminalized. She picked up the phone and dialed 911, and they caught him before he hurt anyone else. So those responses, whether we like it or not, we're never going to stop everyone from being exploited. We're never ever going to, no matter what model we use. But the idea of Sweden model in Sweden is a big myth, because they counted street prostitutes, and then after the internet came out where 85% of the people went inside, they counted them again. Sex workers say they have, it did not improve relationships with the police. They have to screen their clients quicker. They stalk their in-calls and arrest people. But I want to point out the story of Jasmine. Jasmine had been a sex worker. She quit doing sex work and she was a graduate student. And the social worker was concerned that she wasn't ashamed she used to be one. And they gave her 2 small children to her abuser. And she fought for 4 years for visitation. And when she got that supervised visit, he stabbed her to death in front of the caseworker and the children. It wasn't even illegal at that time in Sweden. So this idea, and I think about it too, the cops outside my house, my client lives, he gets busted because they basically admit it, we'll give you a summons, if not, we're gonna arrest you and your wife will find out. How many of you tells his buddy he thinks I snitched on him? What happens to me later? Or I now get evicted because if they're gonna tell the landlord. So none of these things actually help empower people or keep them safe. When we have to threaten people to get them to try to testify, and I want to talk a minute about undocumented sex workers. If you read the 2014 Trafficking in Persons report, where they bust an Asian spa, they say if you won't say you're being divorced, we're calling right now for the bus and you're being deported today. And then they dangle this T visa. But you can get a T visa, you can stay if you'll just say you're forced. You're locked out in a shelter for 2 or 3 years while you have to testify against your coworker. And maybe you were exploited and abused, but you're asking us to snitch on our third-party support staff. A lot of sex workers have drivers that drive them to appointments. They have people that answer their phones and screen their clients. And any other industry, let's think about a real estate agent. I'm selling a house, I'm showing a house to a man, and I'm sexually assaulted. No one is going to blame her for that, right? She was just doing her job. It's not her fault she was alone with the man. But when it comes to sex workers, they're blamed for the violence. So.
Okay, so we have time for maybe a couple more questions. If we can just, those are, I hope it's, we can.
Community services.
Yes, we will. But first, I just would like to know very quickly, if you could, both of you now, starting with you, what is, in your perspective, the best legal approach to sex work and sex trafficking, and why do you think so?
We know from data in New Zealand when they decriminalized adult prostitution that they just about rid exploitation in the sex industry. They've only had 1 trafficking case since then. It's created better relations between sex workers and police officers. A brothel worker was able to sue a brothel for sexual harassment, was awarded $21,000. If you call the cops and say the guy won't pay me, they say, son, you're going to the ATM and pay her, you're going to go to jail for theft, like if you stole a pizza. So we know that legalization doesn't work like Nevada brothels. You have to register, get tested, you have to live there. Anyone can get a record of anyone that's registered. In Seattle, they made strippers register, and the judge had to give an injunction when some man wanted their names and identities through public record request, because he told the judge he wanted to pay for them by name. So this idea that then what happens under legalization is you have sex workers that won't register, so you have illegal workers and legal workers, and they're still being policed, mass surveillance, and decriminalization means trafficking still illegal, abusing people. Before we even had trafficking language, it was always illegal to force people into prostitution, to be having sex with children. All of these things were already illegal. We just have a new name for it. So.
Thank you. Rebekah, so what is the best legal approach to sex work and sex trafficking?
Yeah, I mean, what I've already hinted at, I think the crime of prostitution should be decriminalized I do not think legalization is the right way to go. I was actually trafficked in the legal system of brothels in Nevada, and I'm trying to hit that issue head on currently in the state of Nevada. I feel like these are all separate issues. When you look at the sex industry, there's porn, there's sex trafficking, there's prostitution, there's dancing, right? It's all in the sex industry, and they're all very different, distinct issues, but they're so inextricably connected that you cannot pull them apart. Where one exists, the others exist. And so I don't think legalizing prostitution makes it safer. I think it makes it more dangerous. I think it allows then more people and more predators to come in and want to purchase. I do not agree that anyone is a commodity that should be bought and sold. It doesn't matter what price, it doesn't matter what they've been through, what they look like, and I think the disproportionality in victims across the world, it hints at the marginalization of victims and what it says about those people that purchase them and how they view them as property.
Yeah, that goes back to the question that I was trying for us to elaborate a little bit. The idea that prostitution is bad because women or men sell their bodies. Could you both comment on that a little bit? Because I really think this is important for us to clarify that.
I know when I was
to frame the discussion. Please, what's your comment?
I remember when I was a little girl and I was 16, 17, and already on the streets, living homeless, that I remember how many times I heard the phrase, "You're already giving it away for free, you might as well get paid for it." Which obviously made me feel ashamed about being sexually promiscuous, right? But then it also gave me this idea that somehow I was taking power back. Somehow that by standing on a stage or by opening up my legs and people wanted to pay for me, that somehow that was me taking power back. And in reality, it was the exact opposite. It was, I mean, to have sex with people that you don't want to have sex with, but you need to pay your rent or to do whatever is terrible, I think.
So the idea that prostitutes sell their bodies. So do you agree with that? That prostitutes
sell their bodies?
Sell their bodies.
Well, I mean, I think prostitutes sell an experience.
It's a very common approach within feminist theory.
I think prostitutes sell an experience that now when we look at like slavery historically, it was actually physical bodies being bought and sold, right? Do I think prostitution is that exact act? No, I think it's a variation of that though. I think that have you ever had sex with somebody you don't want to have sex with? But you can't hide your disgust. You have to put on an air of enjoying it so that you get paid, right? Or they don't try to get their money back, because obviously prostitutes get paid first. But that, and then add the layer in of if I have a trafficker, well then I can't blow the call because if I don't get the money, then when I get home I'm going to get beat. So you have to learn how to disconnect from your body every day on the job. Every woman that I know that works in prostitution is extremely skilled at disassociating and going numb.
As you can see, we both own our bodies, even though we've had different experiences. Even after the experience, we both have our own bodies. We can agree on that. And I want to ask women, especially married women and women in relationships, how many of you have had sex with your partner when you didn't feel like it because he was getting your attitude? We've all had sex when we didn't want to have sex, or we're too tired, or weren't attracted to them anymore. And when we talk about domestic violence, the majority of domestic violence victims in shelters return to their abusers because they understand within a few days they have no financial needs to get out of this shelter. And at least with their abuser, the kid had their own room, they had access to a car, maybe only beat them once in a while. We also have 500,000 untested rape kits and evidence loggers that no one seems to care about. So this idea that we care about violence towards women, I think we do care, but I think our policies. I want to point out that President Trump has just redefined the legal definition for domestic violence and rape, and he's removed threats. So if a man threatens, do me or I'm going to punch you in the face, you can't call the cops until he punches you in the face. And it's the same thing with the domestic violence. So again, all these systems start to play to make people more vulnerable. In my experience, out of an hour time period, My clients have more respect for my boundaries and for me than men that I dated when I was younger. And I'll admit I dated some losers. And I'm not saying all men are bad, not all men are cheaters. A lot of women do the same things. But when I think about an hour of my time, 3 to 5 minutes is a sex act, and 45 minutes is sitting pillow talk and rubbing their belly. And but I also have learned to pick a higher class of clients and date. You know, after dark, people are drinking, coked out, partying. My clients are all, you know, usually 50, 60 years old. When I was younger, I was doing couple calls and doubles, and 2 o'clock in the morning, jumping in the car, and all these kind of things. And again, it's never safe. It's not always empowering. Yeah, sometimes you can't wait to roll them out the door. But I think a lot of us experience those situations even in free sex.
But about the selling the body.
I just have a real quick question. So, and because you've already said this, how many years did it take you to get to this point, though? How many instances of abuse and violence and drug use did it take you to where you can only take, and you have the wherewithal to know how to evaluate those clients? How many of those? Right.
And I've been more stable the last 11 years. So I started to learn it wasn't sex work that was the problem. It was a lot of the bad decisions that I was making that compounded it. Absolutely. And we work with a lot of people. The work we do at SWAT behind bars, when they get out of prison, they give them $50, put them on the bus, they got nowhere to go. We have to find them transitional housing. It's the same thing when you deal with people with drug issues. You expect a drug addict to relapse. It's natural. You don't want to enable them. You don't want to shame them. You want to be supportive. We watch women that we rescued some of these women from from 4 or 5 different pimps because they keep going to meet a low-life guy that dogs them out. But you know what? We don't say we told you so. We try to meet their needs and at least get them in a hotel for a day or two, or get them a sobriety house.
I'm so sorry to interrupt you. I think that takes us to the last question, and then we're starting with Rebekah now. What is the mission of your organization and the services provided? Because I think you already talked about funding, right? So I'll leave the funding part out. Just the mission and the services provided.
Sure. I mean, our vision is to eradicate sexual exploitation. We do that by offering compassionate care and healing. We're a faith-based ministry. We have 6 different programs. So we were founded on serving women that wanted to walk out of exploitation and wanted to, whether trafficked by their choice or whatever mixture of circumstances. And what we realized is that if all we're doing is helping the women leave, that we're always going to have a job tomorrow. That if we're not also doing something to go after the demand. So we have our Conquerors program. We offer a support group for men that identify as having a porn or sex addiction that we know are fueling the demand for sex trafficking. But we also walk alongside the families, because ideal situation is to pluck kid out of trafficking, place kid back with family, and if no one served that family during that time, then whatever factors made the child vulnerable in the first place are probably still there, and the child's going to run again. So we serve the families of someone that's been sex trafficked. Obviously, prevention would be the best way to cut this problem off at the head, and so we're in schools doing prevention work. We're also overseas. We're in Iraq, been in the Philippines and Scotland, and soon to be Nigeria, hopefully, providing trauma-informed care through the use of translators in country to people that are recovered over there.
Perfect. Thank you a lot. Thanks a lot. And Bella?
So we partnered with the Brown University. We ran a survey on 63 Rhode Island sex workers. Then in 2017, we ran a 145-question survey on over 1,515 sex workers. This is the largest data set on sex workers that we have. One of our grad students wrote her thesis on the sexual health and HIV section. She's now in Brown Medical School, so we're now creating a continuing medical continuum that would teach service providers to provide non-judgment compassionate services, because the data showed that the majority of sex workers do not disclose that they're sex workers, so they're not even offered PrEP as an option. They don't even know it's an option. We also have cities that have condom for evidence laws. You could be arrested for having more than 2 or 3 condoms, which I think we can all agree, whether we like this or not, does not promote public health and safety. We also do outreach to not just sex workers, but poor people and homeless people. And we provide sample size hygiene kits, tampons, clean needle exchange, Narcan kits, fentanyl test strips. We also do, winter gloves, underwear, socks, food, water. We also have transcribed our Know Your Rights cards into Korean and Chinese, because this is the hardest population flush network. We'd go, they'd see white ladies and they'd shut the door. Owner, New York, New York. But then we got someone that looked like them that spoke their language, and we started to do better. We also work with the Amore Network, which is a local organization of 6 organizations in Rhode Island that are protecting our undocumented population. Under the Trump regime, we have people that will take you into their homes. We're developing mental health vetted services to prove.
I need to cut you in a few minutes.
But we also support incarcerated sex workers, ongoing research. We have a 24-hour support line. We also track the funding on GuideStar. We also track all prostitution arrests, pull the public records to start to understand the dynamics, and we do all that on a $9,000 a year budget. No paid
Perfect.
staff.
You want to make a question before, right? You stood up, so you could start first, and then whoever wants next can raise your hand.
Okay,
I
have a couple of comments, and Rebekah and Bella, I just wanted to commend you both for sharing your story and for the work you're doing. I'm a therapist, and I currently work with some survivors of sex trafficking, and they're adults. And Bella, this is mostly in response to some of the things that you were saying, and as I was thinking as you were talking a little bit earlier, about, you said, I heard, what I heard in your voice was, to me, it sounded like a lot of anger about what society is not doing. And my thoughts that I was having while you were talking is that it takes a long time for change to happen, you know? And what I heard you say, and one of the things I heard you say was that society's not doing anything. But we wouldn't all be here today, and you wouldn't be what you were doing if there wasn't change in progress. And so I just wanted to say that I think by you all coming and sharing your stories, and all of the other panel members that are here today, and all of us here that are learning from all of you and learning from each other, that is showing the change that is taking place. And it's going to be slow, and it's going to be tough, and it's not going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect, as we know. But change is happening, and I just heard, like I said, I heard a lot of anger. And I just hope that you can maybe see this a little bit differently at some point, so that you can feel a little bit more hopeful in what we're trying to, in what society is trying to do for you and all of the other people affected by sex trafficking. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Please, questions or comments? We have 10 minutes. Please, and here, and then here.
Rebekah, I appreciate you sharing, both of you sharing your story. Rebekah, at the very beginning, you talked about language, and you did not like the term sex work. Could you expand on language that you think would be healthier?
Yes, I definitely don't like the term sex work. Like I said, I feel like it's an oxymoron that sex shouldn't be work. I feel like it should be between consenting adults, and I'm a Christian, so sure, I believe in marriage, but I believe at the very least between consenting adults, where the influence of power or money is not involved. And so when I look at it, and what I call it is exactly what it is: sexual exploitation, commercial sexual exploitation.
Just here, and then here, and here.
Do you have any different beliefs about, about women who have children, who are in that field?
Actually, this is, that's a great question. And to give an example, one time I read a newspaper article where a sex worker was in one hotel room turning tricks, and her girlfriend was 2 doors down in another hotel with the children, and everyone flipped out. But for some reason, when women date for love, they bring a predator into their house and they shack up with them in one weekend and he molests the kids. No one's even being charged with child endangerment. Not that I want to punish them, but I want them to understand it's not okay to bring strange men around to your small children, even teenage children. Why would you do that? And you know, we're living in a thing where people are hooking up and moving in together really quickly. That wasn't happening 30 years ago. I also know that sex work allows a lot of women to be at the bus stop at 3 o'clock and go to the soccer games and not work 60 hours a week and maintain their own household without an abusive man. Because if you need a man to pay half the rent, you're really stuck when things aren't going good, and he becomes to have more and more power. And I'm not saying all guys are bad or abusive, but I think even with domestic violence, if more women had their own household, we would reduce domestic violence, because then when women would shack up, it would be because choice and not because think about that, when you live with a man because he pays your half the rent, it's still a form of prostitution.
I just want to have more time because we have 10 people, so please go ahead.
Rebekah, you talked about choosing poverty. Can you expound on maybe the efforts and the programs or services that are being offered to help the women find gainful employment, meaningful employment, and to be able to really support themselves?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, because you're right. I mean, you don't come out of a life of exploitation and get a job at Starbucks. Like, it just doesn't happen. Even if you were trafficked and none of that money was yours, you still had thousands of dollars run through your hands, and you always know, well, I can just go back. It's very hard. It's easy. Like, even though abuse and rape and all that stuff, like, I know how to survive a day in the life. I don't know how to survive a day with no money. I don't know how to survive a day going up and getting a job at McDonald's and showing up to work every day. But we have some awesome NGOs in the room, the NET, obviously Valiant Hearts, Trafficking 911, that and we're creating even more partnerships all the time. Valiant Hearts has partnered with several employers around the DFW area that are willing to say, hey, I want to give sustainable, meaningful employment to women, and I will overlook their backgrounds, I will overlook their criminal record checks, and give them a position, because we have to set them up for success. We can't say, hey, we don't want you doing this, but we don't care what else you do. Like, we don't want to empower you. That's not empowerment. That's disenfranchisement.
Good. You?
Well, I have a comment. I mean, I want to thank you both also for sharing your stories. But I would also like to point to the fact that this panel is really pushing the limits of the conversation in terms of where do and how do our morals come into place and dictate the way we define sex work, the way we define prostitution, the way we define the rights of people to make choices for themselves and their agency. And it seems to me like that is really where we should be heading the discussion to, because our morals can get in the way of sometimes making the policy changes that are actually benefiting the most vulnerable people. So I guess that is that's something that is very appealing to me, to have this panel here today, because it allows us to really rethink the way in which we're defining and the way we're even using the language, and how that translates into real changes and sometimes heartbreaking situations for people that are already in a situation of great vulnerability. So I don't know if you have some comments on that.
Good. You want to comment?
I think you make a good point, and my stance is if we create services for poor people, particularly poor women in youth, we would have less people enter the sex industry, we'd have more people volunteer to exit, we would have sex workers that had to do sex workers less. A lot of sex workers only do it while they're working their way through college. To point out about the definitions, as a compromise, I knew people involved in the sex trade, but I like the word sex worker. I don't care if you call me a whore or a prostitute. You know what I do care you call me? You call me a prostituted woman, which means I didn't have any agency. Because even in the bad decisions, those are decisions I chose. And I need to own up that they were bad choices and things like that.
I think morality, it definitely plays a huge role in, I mean, just how our country was founded, obviously, and I mean, the Constitution, and obviously how we had to go back and amend it to realize that it wasn't protecting everyone, it was only protecting those in power. And I think that definitely, I think that we'd probably be here for a whole week if we really wanted to get in and debate morality, but I think at the end of the day, every human being has dignity and value and worth, and that they should never be bought or sold or have to open up parts of their body to people in order to make a living.
There's one question there, I think. Our last question, maybe.
Sorry, just one quick comment.
No, it's
So
okay.
both, thank you both for your presentations and for being so open about your own experiences and the work that you're doing. I just wanted to mention, based on Rebekah's comment about employment, and came up in both your comments about the importance of sustainable employment during the human trafficking and corporate social responsibility panel. one of the topics that's going to also be discussed is about the idea of working with trafficking survivors and companies working with trafficking survivors and the benefit of working with trafficking survivors and how they also bring a different perspective to the work that the company's doing. So in case of those, those in the room are interested in more solutions-oriented work, that's something that we'll discuss.
And when is yours?
At 3:30.
We have 2 minutes. Does anybody want to say something, or you want to call it a day? All right, so Bella, you want to tell them?
I wanted to say if people have future questions now or even in the future, please feel free to email me at bella@coyoteri.org. We have numerous online educational slideshows, statistics, and research that we are more than welcome to keep the conversation going. And thank you. And thank you.
Yeah, thank you too. Yeah.
Thank you.